Hey, man. Yeah, I know. Listen, let's talk about the partnership. We need to meet up and sort this out.
Trust is one of the most powerful bonds between people. It's the invisible agreement that allows neighbors to share keys to their homes, friends to confide in one another, and families to build their lives around loyalty that feels unbreakable. In quiet towns across America, trust is often the foundation that holds entire communities together. It's what makes a person feel safe lending a hand, sharing a secret, or believing that the people closest to them would never cause harm. But sometimes that same trust becomes the one thing that blinds someone to danger standing right in front of them. On a quiet suburban street late one evening, a pickup truck sat parked beneath a streetlight while distant police lights flickered across the pavement. Hours earlier, a man named Michael Turner had walked out of his home believing he was about to have an ordinary conversation with someone he had known for most of his adult life. To Michael, the meeting felt routine. After all, the person waiting for him that night had been his closest friend for nearly 20 years. Michael Turner was the kind of man who believed loyalty meant everything. He was 49 years old, a hardworking mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop in a modest Ohio town where people knew each other by name. For years he had built a reputation as someone who would help anyone who needed it. If a neighbor's car broke down, Michael would fix it. If a friend was struggling financially, he would find a way to help. People trusted him because he trusted them first. That was the kind of man he had always been. But on a cool evening in 2017, Michael left his home after receiving a call from someone he had known since high school. The conversation sounded simple enough. They needed to talk about a problem connected to their business arrangement. It would only take a few minutes, or so Michael believed. He grabbed his jacket, told his family he would be back soon, and stepped outside without realizing that the decision to meet that night would become the last normal moment anyone would remember. What happened next would leave an entire community searching for answers. Within hours of that meeting, Michael Turner vanished. His phone stopped responding. His truck remained parked where he had left it earlier that evening. The small repair shop he worked so hard to build sat silent the next morning when he failed to open the garage doors. At first friends assumed he might simply be dealing with a personal issue or had taken unexpected time away. But as the hours turned into a full day without a word from him, concern began to spread quickly. Police soon arrived to begin asking questions that would lead investigators down a path few people expected. Because the last person known to have seen Michael Turner alive was someone the entire town believed he trusted more than anyone else. His closest companion. The man who had shared holidays, fishing trips, and countless late-night conversations about life. The man Michael Turner once described as the closest thing he had to a brother. Before we go deeper into this story and uncover how that friendship turned into one of the most shocking betrayals the town had ever seen, take a moment to join the conversation with viewers from around the world following this case. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the events surrounding Michael Turner's disappearance would slowly reveal a truth that investigators could hardly believe when the pieces finally came together. The story begins with trust built over 2 decades, a partnership between friends who believed they understood each other completely. Yet as detectives would eventually discover, the relationship between Michael Turner and the man he trusted most carried tensions that had been quietly building for months. And when those tensions reached their breaking point, the consequences would leave one man missing, another facing questions he struggled to answer, and an entire town wondering how a friendship that lasted 20 years could end in such a devastating way. The town where Michael Turner lived sits quietly among stretches of farmland and winding rural roads in Ohio, the kind of place where people grow accustomed to seeing the same faces every day and where most problems are solved with a handshake and a conversation. Communities like this tend to believe they are protected by familiarity. Neighbors know each other's routines, families share the same schools and grocery stores, and serious crime rarely becomes part of daily conversation. In towns like this, people build their lives around the belief that the people living beside them are trustworthy. That is exactly the kind of place Michael Turner had spent most of his life. To those who knew him, Michael represented the steady rhythm of that community. He was 49 years old, a mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town where customers had been bringing their vehicles for years. His reputation wasn't built on advertisements or flashy promotions. It came from something far simpler. People trusted Michael Turner because he treated everyone fairly and never turned away someone who needed help. Michael was also a father of two who worked long days to support his family and maintain the business he had spent decades building. Friends described him as dependable, the type of man who answered phone calls in the middle of the night if someone's car broke down along a country road. He believed loyalty mattered more than anything else, and that belief shaped the way he treated the people around him. When someone became part of Michael Turner's circle of trust, they remained there for life. That was one of the reasons the events of March 3rd would later confuse and disturb so many people in the town. On that evening, Michael left his home after receiving a request to meet someone he had known for nearly 20 years. The meeting seemed ordinary at first. After all, the person asking to see him was not a stranger. It was his closest friend, someone who had shared countless memories with him since their teenage years. To Michael, there was nothing unusual about agreeing to meet him late that evening to talk about a business matter that had recently created tension between them. He stepped outside expecting the conversation to last only a few minutes before returning home to his family. But that night would unfold in a way no one in the town could have predicted. Michael Turner never returned home after leaving to meet his best friend. His family waited for hours without hearing from him. His phone eventually stopped responding. By the following morning the small auto repair shop where he worked every day remained closed, something that had never happened without explanation before. The sudden silence surrounding Michael's disappearance left friends and relatives asking questions that investigators would soon begin asking as well. Why did Michael Turner agree to meet his best friend that night when tensions between them had already been growing? What exactly happened after the two men drove away together into the darkness of the rural roads outside town? And why would detectives later describe the entire case as a story built around betrayal rather than coincidence? Those questions formed the beginning of an investigation that would gradually reveal how fragile trust can become when money, secrets, and resentment begin to build between people who once believed their friendship could survive anything. Because as detectives began examining the final hours before Michael Turner disappeared, they quickly realized something that would change the direction of the case. The man Michael met that night did not simply know him well. He knew almost everything about him. His habits, his daily routines, the places he liked to go when he needed time alone, even the roads he preferred driving when he wanted to think. And sometimes the person who knows those details best is also the person capable of turning them into an advantage. As investigators would later explain while reflecting on the case, one of the most unsettling aspects of Michael Turner's disappearance was the realization that the person connected to his final meeting understood him better than anyone else in town. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the stranger you fear, but the one who already knows everything about you. To understand why the events of March 3rd would eventually shock an entire town, investigators first needed to look closely at the life Michael Turner had built long before the night he disappeared. Michael was 49 years old and had spent most of his adult life working as a mechanic in the same Ohio community where he grew up. His auto repair shop sat along a modest road on the edge of town, a small garage with a faded sign that locals recognized instantly. It was not the largest business in the area, but for years it had been enough to support Michael and his family. People brought their vehicles to him not only because he was skilled with engines but because they trusted his honesty. Customers often said Michael Turner was the kind of mechanic who would explain exactly what needed to be fixed and never charge for work that wasn't necessary. That reputation had taken years to build, and it made Michael one of the most respected small business owners in the community. Friends described him as a quiet but dependable man who believed loyalty meant standing by the people you cared about no matter how difficult life became. Part of the reason Michael valued loyalty so deeply was because he had experienced a friendship that lasted most of his life. The man who would eventually become central to the investigation was someone Michael had known since high school. His name was Jason Cole, and their friendship began decades earlier in classrooms and football fields where the two teenagers discovered they shared similar personalities and interests. Over time that friendship grew stronger as they entered adulthood together. They spent weekends fishing on nearby lakes, helped each other repair old trucks in the driveway, and celebrated family milestones side by side. Holidays were often shared between their households, and neighbors became accustomed to seeing the two men together during barbecues and community events. Many people in town described Michael Turner and Jason Cole as more than just friends. To those who knew them best, the relationship looked like the kind of brotherhood that develops when two people share years of memories and experiences that outsiders rarely see. For a long time that bond seemed unbreakable. Jason Cole had always been someone Michael trusted without hesitation, which is why their lives eventually became connected in ways that went beyond friendship. When Michael's repair shop began facing financial pressure after several slow business seasons, Jason offered what appeared to be a solution. He proposed helping Michael stabilize the shop by becoming involved in a small investment arrangement. Jason explained that with the right financial support and new equipment, the garage could expand and attract more customers from surrounding towns. To Michael, the offer sounded like the kind of help only a loyal friend would provide during a difficult period. Running a small business can be unpredictable, and the idea of having someone he trusted invest in the shop felt reassuring. Without much hesitation, Michael agreed to the arrangement, believing that the partnership would strengthen both the business and the friendship that had already lasted nearly 20 years. But as months passed, subtle problems began to appear within that partnership. Financial agreements that once seemed straightforward became complicated. Certain payments did not arrive when expected. Conversations about money started replacing the easy laughter that once defined their friendship. At first the disagreements were small and easily dismissed, the kind of tensions many business partners experience while adjusting to new responsibilities. Michael believed those issues could be resolved with patience and communication, just as he had solved other problems throughout his life. Friends later recalled hearing him mention occasional frustrations during conversations, but he rarely spoke about the details. Even when the disagreements with Jason Cole became more frequent, Michael remained convinced that their long history together would allow them to work through the situation. After all, he had trusted Jason for most of his adult life. It was difficult for him to imagine that the same friendship which had survived decades could suddenly become the source of serious conflict. Still, people close to Michael began noticing small changes in his mood during the months leading up to March 3rd. He appeared more stressed when discussing the business. Sometimes he stayed late at the garage trying to sort through financial paperwork long after other shops in town had closed for the evening. On a few occasions neighbors overheard tense conversations between Michael and Jason near the repair shop, conversations that sounded far different from the relaxed discussions they once shared. Even so, Michael continued believing that the situation could be repaired just like the engines he worked on every day. He saw the tension as a temporary problem between two friends who had simply disagreed about money. When Jason Cole eventually called him on the evening of March 3rd asking to meet and talk about the business situation, Michael did not hesitate for long. To him the meeting represented an opportunity to finally resolve the conflict and move forward. What he did not realize was that the trust he had placed in that friendship for so many years was about to lead him into the most dangerous moment of his life. And that belief that everything could still be fixed would ultimately lead Michael Turner to agree to one final meeting with the person he trusted more than anyone else. The evening of March 3rd began quietly, much like any other day in the small Ohio town where Michael Turner had lived most of his life. The winter air had settled over the streets, and by early evening most businesses had already closed their doors for the night. Inside his modest home, Michael spent the first part of the evening doing what he often did after a long day at the repair shop, reviewing paperwork and thinking about ways to steady the business that had been under pressure for months. Running a small garage had never been easy, but recently the financial strain had begun weighing on him more heavily than usual. Despite those worries, Michael still believed the situation could be resolved with the help of the one person he trusted most, his longtime friend Jason Cole. At approximately 8:45 p.m., Michael's phone rang. The caller ID displayed Jason's name. According to phone records later examined by investigators, the conversation lasted only a few minutes. Jason told Michael that the business situation had reached a point where they needed to talk immediately and suggested meeting that evening to discuss what could be done. Michael listened carefully before agreeing. To him, the meeting sounded like an opportunity to clear up the tension that had been building between them and finally put the disagreement behind them. Not long after the call ended, Michael stepped outside to meet Jason near the repair shop where they had spent countless hours working together over the years. The area was quiet at that time of night, illuminated only by scattered streetlights and the faint glow from a nearby gas station. A security camera mounted on the corner of a building would later capture the moment that became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. The footage showed Jason Cole's pickup truck pulling into the lot and Michael walking toward the passenger side before climbing inside. From the outside, nothing about the interaction appeared unusual. The two men seemed calm, exchanging a few words before the truck slowly pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the road leading out of town. Anyone watching the recording would likely have assumed they were simply two friends heading somewhere to talk privately about a problem that needed solving. Yet that brief moment captured on camera would become the last confirmed sighting of Michael Turner alive. As the truck traveled through the quiet streets, investigators would later reconstruct the route using a combination of traffic cameras and cell phone records. The road Jason Cole chose eventually led away from the center of town and toward an area known for its abandoned industrial sites and empty lots left behind after factories had closed years earlier. It was a place few people visited after dark, especially during the colder months when the surrounding fields and buildings stood silent beneath the night sky. At first, nothing about the drive appeared suspicious. Michael's phone continued transmitting location data as the vehicle moved steadily through several intersections and onto the road that connected the town to the industrial area beyond it. For several minutes the signal moved normally across the digital map investigators would later examine during the case. But then something happened that would raise immediate concern when detectives reviewed the timeline. Shortly after the truck reached a narrow road near an abandoned industrial property outside town, Michael Turner's phone signal suddenly stopped moving. At first the location remained fixed in that area for a short time before disappearing completely from the network. Investigators studying the records noticed that after that moment there was no further activity connected to Michael's phone. No outgoing messages. No calls. No attempts to connect to nearby towers as the device moved to another location. It simply went silent. In the hours that followed, Michael's bank accounts showed no transactions, and none of the friends or family members who normally communicated with him received any messages. By the next morning, his repair shop remained closed and his family had not heard from him at all. For a man who rarely disappeared without explanation, the sudden silence felt deeply unsettling to those who knew him. When detectives later began piecing together the timeline of events, one fact became impossible to ignore. The last person confirmed to have been with Michael Turner that night was Jason Cole, the same man who had called him at 8:45 p.m. asking to meet and talk about their business dispute. The security footage showing Michael entering Jason's truck placed the two men together only minutes before the phone signal vanished near the abandoned industrial road. From that point forward, the trail of evidence grew cold. Michael Turner had seemingly disappeared from the town where he had spent nearly his entire life. For investigators, the question that now demanded an answer was simple but deeply troubling. What exactly happened during the drive after the truck left the repair shop parking lot? Because the truth was becoming clearer with every piece of evidence they uncovered. Jason Cole was no longer just Michael Turner's closest friend. He had also become the last person known to see him alive. When Michael Turner failed to return home that night, the silence quickly began to worry the people closest to him. At first his family assumed the meeting with Jason Cole had simply taken longer than expected. Business disagreements sometimes required patience, and Michael had always been the kind of person who believed problems could be solved through conversation. But as the hours passed and his phone continued to go unanswered, concern slowly replaced patience. By early morning his family realized something was wrong. Michael had never disappeared without explanation before, and the repair shop he owned had always opened early each day without fail. When the garage doors remained closed and calls to his phone went straight to voicemail, the situation could no longer be dismissed as a simple delay. Later that day his family contacted local authorities and reported him missing, beginning an investigation that would quickly focus on the last person known to have seen him alive. Police officers started by reconstructing Michael Turner's final hours through phone records, witness statements, and surveillance footage from businesses near the repair shop. The timeline quickly led them back to Jason Cole, the man who had called Michael earlier that evening asking to meet and discuss their troubled business partnership. Jason agreed to speak with investigators and provided what he described as a straightforward explanation of the events that followed. According to his statement, the conversation between the two men inside the truck became tense as they discussed the financial problems surrounding the repair shop. Jason claimed the argument lasted only a few minutes before Michael became frustrated and asked him to pull over near the industrial road outside town. In Jason's version of the story, Michael stepped out of the truck, saying he needed time to cool down and think about what had been discussed. Jason said he waited briefly before deciding to leave, believing Michael would find his own way home after walking off along the road. He told investigators he then drove directly back to town and returned home, assuming the situation between them would settle with time. At first the explanation sounded plausible. Arguments between business partners are not uncommon, especially when money is involved, and investigators had no immediate evidence proving Jason's account was untrue. Yet as detectives began examining digital records connected to that night, several details started to raise concern. Phone data showed that Jason Cole's phone had been turned off for nearly 2 hours during the period when Michael Turner disappeared. For investigators, the timing of that gap immediately stood out. Turning off a phone during such a critical window removed one of the most reliable ways detectives normally track a person's movements. When officers asked Jason about the missing phone data, he explained that the battery had simply died while he was driving home. However, further analysis of vehicle GPS information would soon challenge that explanation. Records obtained from Jason's truck indicated that the vehicle had traveled far beyond the area where he claimed to have dropped Michael off. Instead of heading directly back toward town, the GPS data suggested the truck had moved deeper into a rural region known for its abandoned industrial sites and remote terrain. One location in particular caught investigators' attention. The coordinates placed Jason's truck near a remote quarry several miles outside town, a place surrounded by steep rock walls and deep water that had collected after years of excavation. The quarry was rarely visited except by occasional hikers or hunters exploring the surrounding land. When detectives compared the GPS timeline with the gap in Jason's phone activity, the two pieces of information appeared to overlap almost exactly. For investigators trying to understand what happened to Michael Turner that night, the discovery raised a troubling possibility. Jason Cole might not have returned home immediately after their argument as he claimed. Instead, his truck appeared to have traveled somewhere far more isolated. With this new information in hand, police organized a search operation centered around the quarry and the surrounding wooded area. Officers combed the terrain looking for any sign that Michael Turner might have passed through the region after leaving Jason's truck. Search teams walked the narrow trails that wound through the rocky landscape while investigators examined abandoned structures scattered along the old industrial road. Because the quarry contained deep water pools formed by years of excavation, authorities also called in divers to search beneath the surface where evidence might be hidden from view. The effort lasted for days as volunteers from the community joined the search alongside law enforcement. Helicopters circled above the quarry while investigators studied every clue that might explain how Michael Turner vanished after leaving town that night. Yet despite the scale of the operation, no clear evidence emerged to confirm what had happened there. Weeks turned into months without answers. The investigation remained active, but the lack of physical evidence made it difficult for detectives to prove exactly what had taken place during the hours Jason Cole's phone had been turned off. Michael Turner's family continued hoping for any sign that might lead investigators closer to the truth. Meanwhile, the quiet Ohio town where Michael had lived for decades found itself gripped by uncertainty. Residents who once believed they knew their neighbors well began wondering how a man could disappear after meeting someone he trusted so completely. For detectives working the case, the unanswered questions only deepened their determination to continue searching. And then, several months after Michael Turner vanished, the investigation took an unexpected turn. While exploring the wooded area near the quarry during hunting season, a local hunter came across something hidden among the trees that immediately caught his attention. What he discovered would soon bring investigators back to the remote landscape where they had searched before, and it would finally reveal the truth about what happened on the night Michael Turner climbed into Jason Cole's truck. Several months passed after Michael Turner disappeared, and although the investigation remained active, the quiet countryside surrounding the quarry slowly returned to its usual rhythm. For Michael's family, however, the silence left behind by his disappearance never faded. They continued hoping that some clue would eventually lead investigators to the truth about what had happened that night. That moment finally arrived unexpectedly when a local hunter entered the wooded area near the quarry during the early hours of the morning. The terrain surrounding the old excavation site stretched across miles of uneven ground and dense trees, making it easy for someone unfamiliar with the land to overlook important details hidden among the brush. While walking along a narrow trail not far from the quarry's edge, the hunter noticed something partially concealed beneath leaves and branches that did not seem natural to the landscape. After taking a closer look, he realized the discovery was serious enough to report immediately. Authorities were contacted, and investigators quickly returned to the area they had searched months earlier. When officers arrived at the location described by the hunter, they began carefully examining the site. What they uncovered confirmed the fears that had haunted Michael Turner's family since the beginning of the investigation. Human remains were discovered in the wooded area near the quarry, hidden in a place that would have been difficult to notice without knowing exactly where to look. The remains were transported to a forensic laboratory where specialists conducted detailed examinations to determine the identity of the individual. Days later the results of the DNA analysis arrived, providing the confirmation investigators had been seeking since Michael Turner first disappeared. The remains belonged to him. The discovery marked a painful turning point in the case. For Michael's family, it ended months of uncertainty about his fate. For investigators, it provided the physical evidence needed to push the investigation forward toward the person who had been connected to the case from the very beginning. With the confirmation that Michael Turner had died near the quarry, detectives returned once again to Jason Cole, the man who had been the last person seen with him on the night of March 3. By that point investigators had gathered months of digital records, GPS data, and witness statements that placed Jason's truck in the same area where Michael's remains were eventually discovered. The inconsistencies in Jason's earlier statements, combined with the physical evidence now connected to the quarry, placed increasing pressure on him to explain what had truly happened during the drive that night. When detectives confronted him again with the growing body of evidence, the story he had repeated during previous interviews began to unravel. Faced with the reality that investigators had traced the timeline of his movements far more clearly than he expected, Jason Cole eventually admitted that the events of March 3 had not unfolded the way he originally described. According to prosecutors who later presented the case in court, Jason explained that the conversation between the two men inside the truck became far more heated than he anticipated. The tension surrounding their business partnership had been building for months, and the financial disagreements between them had grown more serious with each passing week. During the drive toward the industrial road outside town, the argument intensified as the discussion turned toward missing money connected to their business arrangement. What began as a verbal disagreement soon escalated into a physical confrontation inside the vehicle. During that confrontation, Michael Turner was attacked. Jason later told investigators that the situation quickly spiraled beyond what he had intended when the meeting began. Realizing the seriousness of what had happened, he panicked and attempted to conceal the crime rather than report it. He drove toward the remote quarry area where investigators had earlier traced his truck through GPS data and left Michael Turner's body in the wooded terrain nearby, believing the isolated location would prevent anyone from discovering what had taken place. For detectives who had spent months piecing together the timeline of Michael Turner's disappearance, the confession confirmed what the evidence had slowly been suggesting. The motive behind the confrontation was rooted in money. Investigators discovered that Jason Cole had secretly been withdrawing funds connected to the repair shop partnership he shared with Michael. When the financial discrepancies began to surface, Michael had confronted him about the missing money. The meeting on March 3 was supposed to be a conversation about resolving the problem, but instead it became the moment when the friendship that had lasted nearly 2 decades finally collapsed. What began as a dispute between business partners ended with one man dead and another facing the consequences of a decision made during a moment of anger and fear. The truth investigators uncovered revealed a betrayal far deeper than anyone in the town had imagined when Michael Turner first disappeared. After the discovery of Michael Turner's remains and the confession provided by Jason Cole, the investigation moved toward its final stage in the courtroom. Prosecutors presented the evidence that detectives had spent months assembling, beginning with the phone call on the night of March 3 and ending with the discovery in the wooded area near the quarry. The timeline showed how the two men met to discuss the growing conflict surrounding their business partnership, how their truck was traced leaving town together, and how Jason Cole's vehicle later appeared in the remote area where Michael Turner was eventually found. The confession, combined with the digital records and physical evidence gathered during the investigation, left little doubt about what had taken place during the drive outside town. Jason Cole was formally arrested and later convicted for his role in the death of the man who had once considered him his closest friend. For Michael Turner's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, though it could never erase the loss that had reshaped their lives. Even after the case reached its conclusion, investigators often reflected on the deeper meaning behind what had happened. Michael Turner had spent nearly 20 years trusting Jason Cole as one of the most important people in his life. They had shared milestones, supported each other through difficult moments, and built a friendship that many in the community believed would last forever. That history made the outcome of the case especially difficult for those who knew both men. Michael had not walked into danger expecting betrayal. He had stepped into Jason's truck believing he was meeting a friend to resolve a disagreement that had grown out of their business partnership. The trust that had once strengthened their friendship became the very thing that prevented Michael from recognizing the risk in that final meeting. When detectives later reviewed the months leading up to March 3, they realized that the warning signs had existed long before the night of the confrontation. Financial tensions between the two men had been growing. Conversations about the business had become more strained. Friends had noticed small changes in the way Michael spoke about the partnership he once believed would help secure his future. Yet those warning signs were easy to overlook when placed beside decades of friendship. Trust can make people believe that problems will eventually work themselves out, especially when the person involved has been part of their life for so many years. In Michael Turner's case, that belief kept him from seeing how serious the situation had become. The betrayal that ended his life did not appear suddenly in a single moment. It had been forming quietly over time, hidden behind a friendship that once seemed impossible to break. Years after the investigation ended, the small repair shop that Michael Turner once opened every morning still stands as a quiet reminder of the life he built through years of hard work and trust. The garage doors that once lifted before sunrise now remain still, and for many people in the town the building represents more than just a closed business. It represents the story of a man who believed deeply in loyalty, a man who trusted the people around him without hesitation. Michael Turner spent decades building friendships and relationships that he believed would always remain strong. Yet the final chapter of his story revealed how fragile trust can become when hidden motives begin to surface. He placed his faith in someone who had shared nearly 20 years of his life, someone he considered more than just a friend. And that trust led him into the final meeting that changed everything. He trusted his best friend, and it became the biggest mistake of his life. When investigators later reflected on the case, many of them returned to the same unsettling question that continues to linger even after the trial ended. Looking back at the months before Michael Turner disappeared, there were moments when tensions between him and Jason Cole began to appear more clearly. Financial disagreements, strained conversations, and quiet concerns expressed by people close to the situation all formed pieces of a puzzle that only made sense after the truth was revealed. At the time, those signs were easy to overlook because they were overshadowed by years of friendship and shared history. For Michael, the idea that his closest friend could become the source of danger seemed impossible to imagine. But when trust runs deep, people often see what they hope is true rather than what might actually be happening around them. And that brings us to a question that many people continue asking whenever they hear this story. If you had been in Michael Turner's position, would you have noticed the warning signs earlier? Would the financial disagreements and growing tension have made you step back before agreeing to that final meeting, or would the weight of a 20-year friendship have convinced you that everything could still be resolved? Stories like this remind us that some of life's most difficult decisions happen when loyalty and doubt exist at the same time. The answers are rarely simple, and every person who hears the story may see it from a slightly different perspective. So now the conversation turns to you. What do you believe about the events that led to Michael Turner climbing into Jason Cole's truck on the night of March 3rd? Do you think the warning signs were clear enough to recognize before the situation reached its final moment, or do you believe trust sometimes makes those signals almost impossible to see? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Your thoughts might reveal perspectives others have not considered. And if you enjoy real mysteries and crime stories like this, make sure to subscribe for more true cases where trust, betrayal, and a single moment can change everything.